talk about a rather provocative subject, which is enterprise blockchain is dead. So I'm curious to find out more. Fred, please, let's give him a round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you. Hey, everybody. Oh, come on. Hey, everybody, are you asleep? Oh, that's nice. So, yeah, we tried to pick a little bit of a provocative topic this year, and they put us in the small room anyway. But what I wanted to do today is talk a little bit about how awesome the last 12 months has been. Because most people have been saying, oh, it's a bear market, it's really horrible, we are hodling and all of that. But from where I am standing in the blockchain world, it's been phenomenal. Right? So we've seen a lot of huge trends emerging, verifying themselves, but we also saw that the blockchain really is sort of maturing. And a part of maturing is that some of the players go out of the space and it doesn't really work. So let's dig into it. So as I said, we're sort of at a pinnacle right now, right? So where utility tokens, public permissionless blockchains, public permission blockchains is doing really, really well. So across the board, when we look at the adoption rates, when we look at new wallets, when we look at enterprise adoption, it's just green, green, green. But what actually is going to happen if we get into sort of a bull market where we see the utility tokens are just spiking up through this roof? There might be a couple of these enterprises who are saying, okay, actually I thought it would only cost, a fraction of a dime to do a transaction, but now suddenly we are in, Ethereum land where it's $100 to do a transaction, right? So we're sort of standing at a level where we have certain parameters we need to solve for, even though the world looks really awesome. So what are we really talking about? So this is like the only slide you should take a picture of today because this is sort of the main thing, huh? So what we saw is a huge shift to third generation blockchains. And we even saw some of the first and second generation blockchains are trying to update. Now, what is a third generation blockchain? Well, a third generation blockchain works on the narrative that there is not just one type of identity, but there's multiple types of identity. Right? There is not just one type of asset representation, so like a Bitcoin or an ETH or an ADA, but there is multiple types of asset representation, and some of them hold zero or no financial value. So they're really like transactions in a decentralized distributed database. And this is changing the game completely, right? Because I was just in Brussels discussing the new MiCA regulation, and you know what? It's all the banks and it's all the exchanges sitting in there, and you know what they're all saying? Don't worry, regulators. It's all capital markets and we have the licenses. That's really a shame because I think there's a lot of things happening around gaming, around NGOs, around enterprise adoption, where we say, yeah, we don't necessarily need to have a financial intermediary to use a database, right? So this is a huge sort of uptake and a huge epiphany moment for us to engage more with regulators and policymakers. And we gathered quite a few layer one blockchains around us to join that. Huh? And the last but not least is we've seen a huge increase in sort of the use cases as metadata and different types of contracting languages is emerging. So this shift has been really volatile and sort of positively going up in the last 12 months. The utility tokens we spoke about already, regulatory clarity is coming, but it's too capital markets oriented, unfortunately. However, we do see that regulators are really, they're coming to our door now and they're asking, can you help us? So we actually have a principle-based regulation. So we have a situation that we're not killing growth across multiple industries, but we're actually looking at across all social systems, including financial systems. So I think that's been super positive in the last 12 months. So we've seen, even though most people are saying, we've seen a lot of regulatory enforcement on projects. What we're actually seeing from the enterprise sort of blockchain adoption and the layer one space is we're actually seeing the opposite. We're seeing regulators who's investing in talent. We're seeing regulators who is coming to us and they want to learn. We even had to put our own educational content out there focusing on policymakers and regulators to talk about third generation blockchains. The other part of what I spoke a lot about last year is sort of about, these private blockchains. And as you probably have seen, the cost of operating them is just too high, right? So basically what the large Fortune 500 companies are seeing is that the trade-off to go to something who looks like a blockchain-based infrastructure is too big if it's a private blockchain. So they want to have something which is more towards public. And every single week, there's a new RFP in the market from a huge company representing a huge brand. And in the first 5 lines, it says something like, it needs to be open source, and it needs to be a public blockchain. I mean, isn't that insane in a bear market? Right? Quiet. No, this is really changing crypto, right? Because what it does is it's really changing what is crypto and what is the underlying fundamentals which crypto is based upon. Now, there is some governance challenges, I won't lie to you. It's actually really hard to run a public permissionless blockchain with a huge community and there's different stakeholders. And how do you sort of, hand over the baton to the next generation? And how do you ensure they take, what you feel is good decisions? So I think most third generation blockchains, they are sort of looking at, this sort of governance challenges, operational resilience. And I will come back to that a little bit in a couple of later slides, right? But the notion is very simple. If you are a large company, or if you are a small company, you have 10 employees or 20 employees, and your world is a business on a blockchain, wouldn't you like to participate in the decision-making on the infrastructure you base your business and 10, 20, 50 families on? You would, right? And therefore, it's super important that we actually create a way where not just large companies, but also small companies who actually bet their infrastructure on it can participate. Now, I showed you this last year, and we had a long discussion about what it means and how a circular system goes towards economic sustainability. For those of you who were here last year, you will see this has been dramatically updated. It's still the same picture, but there's a lot more clarity around those boxes. And what I wanted to spend some time on is talking about in general, but I will use Cardano as an example because I do think there's some really good blockchains out there. But in general, what are the big challenges we are facing right now, and what do we need to answer to get? Well, the previous panel spoke about institutional adoption, which, sorry, we got that, right? JP Morgan is using crypto, right? So Fidelity is using crypto. You can pay for PwC services using crypto, right? I mean, it's there, right? So when I speak about institutional adoption, I speak about when are institutions like larger enterprises or relevant enterprises actually starting to use the blockchain as intended. And crypto is just one of those components, right? So what we saw, specifically on Cardano, right, but it goes hand in hand with many other blockchains, is that we haven't seen a lot of radical new innovation. I might be a little bit hard now, right, but what we saw is Bitcoin, and Bitcoin really changed the narrative, and then we've seen NFTs. Now, we also saw a huge growth in what we call consuming the blockchain. But what really is happening is that the legacy businesses is coming faster and faster. I put a couple of logos in here which could mean something for somebody. So here is a nation state, for instance. Here is a large a reforestation project. Here's United Nations Humanitarian Crisis Organization, right? But what we could also do there is we could put Mercedes in there, because they have a live application on a blockchain. We could also put in Coca-Cola, right? So suddenly what we're seeing is that instead of all these, we have a little innovation arm and they're playing around with something in the basement, well, that's actually maturing and coming in the real operating model. And that's when it gets really interesting, because they start having questions about this landscape. So if I'm suddenly responsible for 10,000 employees and I'm under EU GDPR and consumer protection, I have distribution in 50 different countries, how do I ensure, because I live up in the green box up there, how do I ensure that I can actually contribute to the code repositories? How do I ensure that the incentive parameters for the blockchain, which I am living on or have a part of my business on, that I can sit at the governance table, that I know that they're there in 20 years' time, but it's not just an echo of that in 20 years' time? And how do I ensure that the features down in the lower right corner are in such a way that the new products I'm having in my pipeline, they also can live on the blockchain? And now what you suddenly are faced with is a situation of trade-offs, right? So this is a picture just on metadata, right? The metadata, we're often saying, the data is the new oil, right? It's the blood of a company. And we've been protecting data for so long that most people is really scared about opening up to the engine room and getting innovation happening, right? So when we see here, sort of Bitcoin had about 50 bytes in a transaction. Ethereum, the second generation, have about 70 bytes. And this is Cardano. I could have put, Teslas and Polkadot and a few others up there, right? But this is our ability now to take valuable data from an enterprise application and start using the blockchain for something relevant. So if you imagine, we are in Crypto Valley today, right? You could sort of think about market cap, right? So and then you can do the same sort of thought about where the world will be going, right? But what I'm really trying to say to you is that you haven't seen anything yet. this is just the start. What we've been living through in the last 8 years of revolution from Satoshi to now, this is going to be a blop on the time curve compared to what you're going to see in the next 5 to 6 years. Because we are now not just talking about something who might go away or not go away. We're talking about something where nation states, regulators, huge chunks of businesses, the largest businesses in this world are starting to take this serious. And for those of you who think that AI just took over the whole show, well, I got news for you, right? There's two ways of looking at AI. One is computing models, right? So computational models. So that's like Wolfram Alpha. So basically you're looking at facts. You're trying to get into a place where you can compute an answer. And then you have the neural networks and the text-based editors we're seeing right now, which is really on a high and is super interesting, right? But what they're doing is they're not talking about what's right or what's wrong. They're looking at a large data set of unstructured data and saying if there's more of X, then X must be correct. But what we can then do is we can put a blockchain underneath that and we can get better data, which means we get better decision making, and we can now use the text editor to do code, right? So we can program a smart contract using ChatGPT. Right, that basically lowers the barrier for most people to actually interact with the blockchain, which is good, right? Right? And when you then add a little bit more extra text space so you can put some more stuff on the blockchain, you're actually able to solve really big problems. So the problem about operational resilience this is the internet, by the way. This is an old slide. You've probably seen it before, right? But a lot of people got really shocked when they actually noticed that there was a little repo who was maintained by a private individual in Nebraska, which basically the whole internet is built on, right? And unfortunately, we do still see that with some blockchains. And we still need to be very much aware of how do we answer those questions. In the old world, we have a framework for that. It's called a SOC 2 audit, or an ISA 3401 type 2 audit if you're in financial services, right? But there's a way which the governments are trying to mitigate the risk when you become a substantial infrastructure component. And therefore, what I really urge you to do, because a lot of you have a lot of experience, right? Start looking after those small things who can break down the whole blockchain. And instead of hiding it, point it out. Okay? Point it out, because the more of those chinks in the armor we can take away, the more ready we are to answer those questions to get another million people on a blockchain. Last but not least, as you've probably seen many places, sidechain architecture is really coming off, right? So this is a slide we actually did for the Singapore monetary authorities. The reason we did that is because they had a public consultation, right, where they're saying, we want to build capital market infrastructure on open source and public permissionless blockchains. That's a regulator, huh? That's pretty insane. And yes, they've done the first couple of trades already. So what we wanted to say is that it's not just on Ethereum, but there's a lot of layer 3 blockchains who actually have mature layer 2 solutions where you can do, unlimited amount of transactions. You can even change the consensus algorithm. You can have a permissioned environment which you can port in to a layer 1 public permissionless blockchain. These things are live now. It's not just something we're talking about as we've been doing in the last couple of years. And it's not just with Cardano, huh? So, but the hardest point we're facing right now in the maturity part is that one of the chinks, one of those small little foundational pillars who might tumble the house is governance, right? Because as more and more people come, there will be more and more interest. And that is, for me, what I call the tug of war. So the first question we have is, how do we change the rope? So every public permissionless blockchain, well, probably even every blockchain, has some kind of a change management system. And how do we ensure that that change management system, that we can change the ropes of the blockchain while thousands of businesses, in Cardano's case, we're getting close to 2,000 businesses who's deploying and living on Cardano. How can we change the machinery, change maybe some of the rules while these people depend on it? Right? That's a huge attack vector. This attack vector we don't have on Bitcoin. Bitcoin is sort of the holy grail, right? But it doesn't have any changes either, right? So when you look at the tug of war, you see the incentives of the participants, and Bitcoin is a little bit of a stalemate, which is amazing. It means that it's super stable, no attack vectors, it doesn't go away, it keeps bothering everybody, right? And it just works. Right? But when we have these third generation blockchains, what we're doing is we are adjusting the tech stack as we understand the needs and the features of the companies you're representing. And when we do that, right, then you introduce attack vectors. And if you then want to have a decentralized ecosystem, you have to ask yourself is that, okay, so we have thousands of companies who's asking for code updates and features, and you're having different optimums in terms of transaction fees and attacks and adversaries, right? And on the other hand, you want to have these new features in there. That's a really hard problem to solve. The good side about it is it introduces business opportunities for Q&A and cybersecurity companies to come in now and actually live on the blockchain, because there's coming enough substance for them to specialize into it. The other part is the majority of the participants. So who is the participants on a blockchain? Is that the one who owns the tokens? Is that the one who sacrifices their day-to-day job in the centralized finance, and they're now built on a blockchain where they have employees and the community and everybody there? So they're basically depending on this blockchain. Shouldn't they have equal rights or even more rights than the one who holds the tokens? What about the one who actually operates the blockchain? So Cardano, as you know, is a proof-of-stake blockchain, right? We have more than 3,000 operators of the blockchain, right? Shouldn't they have a say in it? And what's the best optimum of that? So this is a really hard problem to solve, and probably you get you get a prize if you solve it. But that's where we are with Cardano at the moment. So everything actually looks super green where we are looking at it from. And what we're trying to do right now is we're saying that the Cardano Foundation can no longer be unbiased. It can no longer be representing the whole community, because if the community now is millions of people who's interacting with different interests, what we need to get to is a situation that you can still have a public permissionless infrastructure with everybody, even if you don't have an ID, that you can contribute to, you can live on, you can participate in, right? And then you have the Cardano Foundation, where we're trying to unlock some of those ravels and show not just the regulator, but inspire everybody to see what you can actually build on a blockchain. Therefore, I highly encourage you to go down to our booth if you haven't been there already, and kind of, figure out why it is that, that blockchain, not just Cardano, is open for business, huh? So thank you very much, and I hope we can take a question.
Oh, we can have the applause.
Oh.